My name is Becca. I'm going to go ahead and try to share my screen here. So forgive me as I set that up. Hopefully you can all hear and see everything. We are going to try to share some videos, so hopefully that works as well. But like Scott said, my name is Becca Corbell. I work at the Seton Shrine with Sister Anne Marie. Scott is our neighbor, just upstairs and down the hall. And we are a historic site. So we do have 2 historic homes here, as well as a museum, but then we also have a fully functioning worship space as well, because the person that we mainly interpret was a Catholic in the early 1800s, late 1700s. So the Catholic Church is still functioning. That was the way she prayed here, and we still pray that way here. So I want to mostly let Sister Anne Marie talk at the beginning, because this really was her dream, and we're going to talk a lot about that. But I just want to give you a heads up. We're going to ask you some questions throughout the presentation. You guys have been so wonderful to every presenter, sharing your thoughts and your questions in the chat. And so we're going to ask you to do that as well. But any questions about the content or things like that, we'll save for the end. Yeah, so Sister Anne Marie, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and get us going.
Certainly. I don't know how this exactly works. So if you can hear me, can you hear me and see me?
We can see and hear you.
Okay, great. Then I'll go from here. Thank you very much for inviting us. In a way, I was kind of surprised that we were asked to talk about our program. And the only reason I say that is because when I came here to Maryland, I came to be a docent for what I thought was going to be 1 year. And interestingly enough, because of with cancer, I ended up staying here until now. So this was 2011. And one thing about the consortium or the Master Docent Workshop is that really, this whole program helped me really become part of Frederick County and the whole historical scene here, the consortium. And I shout out to Liz, because she knows that it offered me incredible insights as I heard the presentations every year. I'd come to the workshop, and it also helped me in networking with other people, and it just opened up so much to me. And also part of it at a later date was we got to go to so many different sites that I never would have seen before. So, excuse me, I just want to thank you all for making things possible. And as Scott tried to say my name, it's Sister Anne Marie Lamoureux. And before coming here, I was in Bed-Stuy. Do you have that picture? Okay. This was my neighborhood. Actually, this was down the street for me. And the buildings in Bed-Stuy, I was there from 1991 to 2010. And then I came here in 2011. And this is just some of the buildings in our neighborhood. It was the Bed-Stuy projects, which were anywhere from 12 to 24 stories tall. So in my immediate neighborhood, 9 blocks by 5 blocks, was 95,000 people. As you can see or get the sense from that, it was very heavily populated but also didn't offer a whole lot of time away from the noise of the city, away from just survival in many ways. And having been there 19 years, one thing as a sister is I get to go on a 8-day retreat every year, which means I leave the area and I'm in a peaceful place. I have time to just be and not, worry about anything. And I was challenged, even when I was still there. What would your dream be if you didn't have to worry about funding or money or personnel? And I thought about that and I said, what I would want most, and my dream would be that the people that I lived with, worked with, and they worked with me, if they could just have a day like that, where they could leave the city, leave that area, and just have a day where they felt safe, they felt taken care of, they didn't have to worry about childcare, they didn't have to worry about anything, they didn't have to worry about getting shot, they don't have to worry about anything, and it would just be a day for them to experience beauty, to experience quiet, whatever. And so I was a docent at the National Shrine of Elizabeth Ann Seton here in Emmitsburg, excuse me. And then after a number of years, I went on a sabbatical. This was 5 years ago. And when I came back, I decided I needed to go back into similar area. And I spoke to Rob Judge, who is our executive director. And I said, it's been good being here, but I really want my boots on the ground again. And so I'm thinking of going to Mississippi and other things. And he, at that time, pulled out a letter that was from Pope Francis. This was 2017. And Pope Francis released a document asking shrines specifically to do some things. And one of them was just to be a place of welcome. And that the doors are wide open to the sick, the disabled, and above all to the poor, the marginalized, refugees, and migrants. And it was kind of like, okay, maybe this is the place I'm supposed that I can do this. And as it turned out, Rob said to me he had shown that to the board, and I had free reign to see what I could do. Well, of course, the first thing I needed to do was to find out what the needs were. That's one thing is so important, is to listen to people and find out what their concerns are, what their hopes are, what their dreams are. And so I just like, later on, we'll go into how it connects with a little bit closer to Mother Seton. But if Becca can get our video on, this is one of the people, the two here. There's a video about our program, Seeds of Hope, and it's just a couple of minutes long. Thank you,
Yes,
Becca.
we're going to go ahead and start with that. It's a bit of a testimonial of someone that went to the first Seeds of Hope retreat, a friend of ours from Baltimore. And then we'll go into the specifics of kind of how we started this program, how it connects to your work in history, etc. But we wanted to start with this.
The thing that got me there because I was depressed and I wanted to talk. My mother had just passed away. You know, I was just hurting. You know, she was my everything. I need to get out of Baltimore for a few days, man. Just gotta get away. But I wanted to be around the church though.
I had a dream 20 years ago, and my dream was that we could offer retreats or days of beauty and healing for the migrant, to the marginalized, to those that are suffering, the sick.
When we on retreat and you with the sisters, you know what you feel? You feel a lot of love because you know what? That's love. They not faking. They not just doing it to be doing it because they giving up their life. So I sure enough, I went up there, just started crying. I said, sister, I'm gonna be honest with you, I'm up here. I said, I'm depressed. I'm like, why me? I do all the right things. I'm working, this and that.
This is the place to come when you need to be fed. This is a place to come when you just need some time.
It felt like I left everything here and I let it go. That was a change of part of my life because I had so many blessings after that.
So as you can tell, we blend a lot of things together, both spirituality and history. But some of the things in that video, especially just now as I was watching it again, peace, stillness, respect, those are things that anyone can offer at any time, particularly in places of education, right? That's what we're trying to do as educators, is empower the people to learn and to grow. So we felt, and kind of considered Scott's invitation to this, Master Docent, just to consider some of those things yourselves in your history, in your sites that you're educating people. So we're going to go a little bit into specifically what we do and then how you might be able to do it. Also, sister, one thing you said at the beginning, I never noticed, but Sister Emery was only supposed to be here for a year as a docent. And same thing for me, almost 10 years ago. This was a summer job for me. I am from Northern Frederick County and was only supposed to be here less than a year. And now I'm here 10 years. So I thought, I never realized that. So specifically what we do. So we'll have groups of all different types of people. Sometimes they're strangers to each other. Sometimes they're from the same community or shelter or halfway house. But they spend the day together here at the shrine. Some things that always are included in that day are the historic homes of Elizabeth Seton, time in the museum, time watching the film on Elizabeth Seton, presentations with our docents, particularly on the artwork and architecture in the worship space. Oftentimes that docent is Sister Emery, so she gets her foot back in being a docent those days. But most importantly, we really try to empower our friends to experience the site how they want to. They can spend extra time in one of the historic homes. They can just sit and be in the garden or on the grounds. So time to rest, and they have autonomy to navigate the site how they want, just like everyone else would. Another thing we always do is we always feed them really well. So we ask whoever we're working with from the group kind of what their dream meal would be. So if that's a steak dinner for everybody, or authentic enchiladas or different things. We always make sure that they are very well fed and sent home with a lot of leftovers. And then at the end of the day, we always get together as a group, whether that's a group of 5 people or a group of 80 people to 100 people, and share together what touched your heart. What is the thing that really changed a moment for you in your experience today? So those are some core things. Every retreat day is a little bit different based on who we're working with and what means the most to them, how much time they have, etc. But those are the core things we always do.
Well, some of the groups that we have offered it to, like the Rescue Mission in Frederick, Seton Center, they have a Staying Ahead program that's now also in other parts of Frederick. But you can just see some things, the different groups. One of the ways that we get groups are, as I said, boots on the ground. We'll get somebody who's there in this, whatever the area is or situation is, and invite them to come and see if that's something they would like to do. And then they are in charge of getting the word out, and we take care of, we've been able to now subsidize transportation to get here, whether it's bus, as it says, from Baltimore, inner city Baltimore, or Washington, DC, or wherever the people are coming from. Or they might be local, or we might send vans to Frederick. That's because we've been able to get the support to do that. Next slide.
So Liz Chateau put in the chat, and I could not agree more, that all docents and museums can heed this call to action. So having both of us, Sister Anne-Marie and myself, gone to Master Docent and sort of knowing the types of things you learn at Master Docent, we wanted to tailor this, our program, to what you all do. And there are 3 lessons that we have learned as we've kind of figured out how to answer this call to action and how the retreat program has kind of grown. There are 3 things we wanted to focus on today that the participants have taught us. Oftentimes we think, oh, we're helping them, we're teaching them, but honestly, more often than not, they're teaching us, they're helping us, and it's a mutual relationship, as I'm sure so many of you experience in your day-to-day life. So this is where, for each lesson, we are going to ask some open-ended questions for you all to put in the chat. So the first lesson we want to talk about today is that history should never be taken for granted. And Sister Anne-Marie has a great story about this from one of the earlier retreats that we did.
This beautiful woman here getting, I think that's when she was, no, she's coming in. I was going to say getting on the
I
bus.
think she's coming in, yeah.
Anyways, she is originally, well, she is from Uganda, and that's her son behind her. We had a group come up from Washington, DC, and she happened to be in the country for 2 weeks. And everybody said to her, why don't you come on this trip? Why don't you come on this trip? And she's like, well, I don't speak English and a number of things. So, but they encouraged her and she came along. And at the end of the day, when we shared what touched your heart the most, she got up and spoke in her native language, and she spoke with such power and such, it was just amazing. I just had chills thinking about it. And in her language, and I almost didn't have to know what she said, but a good thing her son, whose picture is behind her, he translated, and he said, she said what touched her heart so much was being in the house where Mother Seton had taught the girls, where Mother Seton had died, where so many things had happened. She said, just being there, and she said, in my country, our history has been destroyed. We don't have history. They don't have any of the tactile things that we have there. And she said, you go into your future with your history. Now that's not new for any of you because you're involved in museums and historical sites. For me, it was like, oh my goodness, that's why we're here. And I'm kind of delayed up here, I guess, because I never realized the power of our history and how we go forward. So I just wanted to share that story with you.
So kind of going off that, asking you all, is there a part of history locally, globally, or a character from history, a person that you have taken for granted in the past? While you're thinking about that or sharing in the chat, we would love to hear some answers, kind of get some audience participation. But I can say the woman we interpret here, Elizabeth Seton, lived in my hometown, Emmitsburg, Maryland, which is a very small hometown and really nothing to do. And I never really cared about her, to be honest. And come to find out later, I sort of loosely knew that she started Catholic education in this country. Her sisters went on to start Catholic healthcare in this country. And just the vast impact that some of her decisions in this small podunk town had on this country, I had always taken for granted. Yeah, so is there anything that, if anyone wants to share, you can feel free to unmute yourself too, if there's anything that you've been surprised by or realized you were taking for granted? Any brave souls?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, James Castle here from Brunswick. I think something, to be fair here, I'll go on camera here, is taking for granted some of our clergy of the past. Churches do, I can't loop all churches together, group all churches together, but sometimes churches, especially small churches, have not always focused on their history, which is fine, right? They're focused on their main purpose. And with that, as we go back into our history, that those clergy folks were very important in the local communities and the society, and we've kind of lost their story. There's a very well, historic wise, us historians kind of know of a very well-known gentleman in the Brunswick area who was a poet, and he wrote poems. But when we talk to a younger generation about that person, there's like that head turn, and it's of course our job to interpret that history and to educate about it. But I also feel like those folks have kind of been lost to history, and I think it's an important project to try to focus in back on those people. That's it for me.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. And even going on camera. Thanks, James. No, I totally agree. I think some of those lesser famous people often do get lost to history. It was so interesting to hear during the restoration of the Frederick Steeples presentation, how some people were sharing about the history of their church. Not a lot of churches have that written history that could be so helpful. But thank you for sharing. Anyone else?
Yeah. I'm Cindy Poole, Catoctin Furnace. It was just very interesting. As I have volunteered at Catoctin Furnace, we have found that my husband's family actually has history there. We never knew it until we started looking through these old records that they have for company store records. And that has produced a lot more information additional research to try to find these people. And I think it's, just volunteering at the different historic sites. You find out more about yourself, not just other people. They were people who lived there. They worked there.
Yeah, that's amazing. Your site is awesome too. I go there a lot. That's awesome. Thank you.
I was going to jump in. This is Deb Carr, because actually I belong to Harriet Chapel, which is on the grounds of Catoctin Furnace. And they actually, or someone who was a parishioner, wrote a book called Faith in the Furnace, which is a history of Harriet Chapel from its very beginning. I think it only goes into like the mid 1980s, so it doesn't go all the way up to present time, but it gives you some brief biographical sketches of like the different Episcopal priests that were part of the congregation, and how their lives were intertwined with the community. And if somebody didn't think to write that down, you would have no idea that any of that happened, because back in the day that Harriet Chapel was in the middle of nowhere, and that was considered a difficult assignment, probably similar to how it was back in the day when Mother Seton was there.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. Don't worry if you didn't get a chance. We still have 2 more times. Awesome. So the next lesson that we want to highlight is that history reminds us we're not alone. And again, we realize we are preaching to the choir, but these are lessons that we've learned as we've gone through.
Exactly. Preaching to the choir is right. Excuse me. One of the things we have, history reminds us that we are not alone. And once we had this group and this young woman, when we shared again at the end of the day, what touched your heart, this teenager remarked that she saw all the things that Mother Seton went through. Her family, she said, was having a really difficult time. And a lot of things happened to them. And when she went through the houses, not just the houses, was on the grounds and the area, et cetera, she said, I believe now that, if you have faith, you can get through almost anything. And it was seeing how, well, Elizabeth Ann had a hard childhood herself. A lot of losses, a lot of people just not being available to her. And anyways, I am a former high school teacher. And when she shared that, I was just touched by, this is one less young person who's going to think of suicide, because it was now the way she expressed it, she realized that she could get through some of what was going on. So I just share that.
So we have another clip of a good friend of ours, James, who also came on one of our first retreats. And just a little backstory before James speaks. So James is relatively local and lives in a very small space. He basically has a 1-room place, no kitchen, nothing like that. And it struck me so much, as you'll hear, James was particularly struck by Mother Seton's difficult living conditions. So I'll let him speak for himself.
Mother Seton's home was amazing, because during the pilgrimage there, they're talking about, I couldn't believe, for instance, the 1 bedroom has a fireplace in it, yet 16 women slept in this room. I mean, it's so small. I mean, I couldn't believe how they did it. They had to, it kept them warm, but 16 people in 1 small room. And the artifacts there are really neat because they're original. Everything there is original. And how Mother Seton, how they survived is incredible. There's a lot of faith in God to be able to do that back then. No question about it.
So this is where we've been referencing, oh, Elizabeth Seton, Mother Seton, as she was also called. We've sort of been referencing her life. For those of you that may not know her, we're going to go over just very, very broad strokes, her life. And she was from New York City, but through a long chain of events ended up here in Northern Frederick County in Emmitsburg. So Sister Anne Marie is going to go over a little bit of the things that she experienced, which we found to be great on-ramps for people that are struggling. She's a very relatable character in history.
So some of the things, and we could run down that group of things, but at the bottom it says she was a wife, a mother, a widow, a teacher, a religious, and a leader. The first part, in her life as a child, her mom died when she was 3. Her baby sister also died. And there were a lot of losses throughout her life that people can relate to. The father remarried, and the stepmother was it really couldn't take care of her. I mean, she was unavailable emotionally and in a lot of other ways, and had 6 other children with her father. Anyways, and then her own father, when he died, that was hard for her, and he would go away often. He was the first public health physician in New York City. Anyways, I could go through a number of things, but she dealt with, again, the stepmother. There was addiction in the home. There was loneliness. She married a wonderful man, William Seton. They were in love. They had 5 children. He got very sick. They went to Italy in hopes that the weather and the climate would help him get better from tuberculosis, which seemed to be the family illness. And that did not happen. He ends up dying over there. He was quarantined, and when he got out of quarantine, he died like just after Christmas, and they were there just before Christmas. Anyways, when she changed her religious beliefs, she lost family members. His family was dead set against it. So anyways, that she got cut off from them. And we could go on, she had to move when they went bankrupt because his ships were raided, etc., and lost. Anyways, not to belabor it, but she had so many experiences that people can relate to. And especially, I was thinking of 2 of her children predeceased her, and from tuberculosis. And when we have parents come, or a mother come and realize that what a hard time Elizabeth Ann had with that, and then what she ended up doing in the end. So her life is very relatable, and that's very helpful because we have groups that we have people that have all sorts of different backgrounds. So anyways, thank you.
And a lot of times people experiencing a variety of different types of poverty, that can be financial poverty, but also just not having a support system or not having role models of the type of life that they would dream of. They look to figures that they don't know face to face in this day and age. They look to history, they look to other characters. And so kind of asking you all, is there a time of struggle in your life that you found inspiration in a historical figure? And you don't necessarily need to go into detail of what the struggle was if you're uncomfortable with that, but just someone that you've been really inspired by throughout history. I'm sure there has to be. You all are so passionate about what you do.
I was going to say what the sister just related about Mary, Mother Seton. There are a lot of things, fortunately, not the entire list, that I could relate to in the past 7 years. And, just the fact that she moved from New York down to Maryland, and that part of Northern Maryland would have been the wilderness.
Yeah. Especially coming from Manhattan. Yeah.
Yeah, from Manhattan, you changed religions, everybody rejects you, and then you say, well, I'm going to move to Northern Maryland and I'm going to found a religious school. Yeah, so that would take a lot of courage.
Absolutely. Another thing we've really found to be compelling, just because we now have the experience, is Sister Emery mentioned her husband was ill and they were put in quarantine because of the yellow fever pandemic. And Mother Seton writes a lot and reflects during that time in quarantine. And we all now know what that feels like a little bit. So we were like, oh, wow, we can identify and be inspired by how she used her time in quarantine. I know I did not use my time praying as much as Mother Seton did. Anyone else?
If I can speak here, without going into any real detail, yes, certainly I can think of figures in my life or figures that I've known, people that I've known of whose struggles have inspired and encouraged me. And sometimes you think, well, if they got through that, I can get through this. So it's amazing how that works sometime. And I'm thankful that it does work.
Me as well. Yeah, absolutely. That was beautifully said. So there's one more.
Can I add something to that, Becca?
Yeah, go for it.
One thing, obviously, you don't have to be Catholic to come here. That's very important for people to know. However, yes, I had something I was going to say, and I'm suffering from, but one thing I do share with anybody who does come is that we do not worship saints. So even though Mother Seton's been named a saint, it does not mean that that doesn't mean we're worshiping them. I have, what was I going to say? My mother's deceased. I have an older sister that's deceased. And because they're deceased, it doesn't mean that I no longer have connection with them. I truly and firmly believe, and many of my friends who in other cultures experience that connection with those who have gone before them. And I think that that's one of the things you kind of experience here at the shrine. My original reason or my original dream was not at a place like this, but it's turned out to be much better than I ever would have imagined, because it is a place that has a wonderful history and this almost tactile presence of a wonderful woman and her children.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, Ralph, thanks for sharing. He said he was inspired by the multitude of everyday civil rights figures in history. I totally, the everyday figures, I really like that distinction. So we've sort of been looking backward, I guess, at history. But oftentimes, especially something I've learned, is that history can give you hope for the future. One thing we don't dive too deep into today, but I'm happy to talk about it more. I feel like I talk about it a lot, is that looking back to your history or to other figures in history gives you the skills to imagine what your future could be. Renee, you even said that, like, being inspired and encouraged by different people allows you to it changes your perspective. And a lot of times the people that we're helping, not even helping, the people we're welcoming here, they're living in this crisis mode for a variety of different reasons, whether their safety is not insured or their finances are not stable. So they don't have the luxury, the privilege of always being able to imagine what life could look like. So coming here and experiencing history, particularly the Shrine has started over the last 5 years or so, a living history program that's very immersive. And we'll go into a little bit of that. It really allows them to cultivate those skills of being able to think into the future. What could it be like for me? So one program we wanted to just take promo, I guess, free promo that we recently started is our junior history program. So we have, like I mentioned, a living history program for adults that are staff here. We've been doing third person interpretation for a really long time. We just started getting into second and first person over the past few years. And we started this junior history program for girls specifically in grades 4 through 12. And the reason is because Elizabeth Seton started a school for girls. So these young women get a lot of mentoring in a variety of skills, public speaking, research, etc., 19th century living, historical interpretation. But as they move through the program, they even get a historical figure that went to school here, and they interpret her eventually through mentorship and all these kinds of things. It's a really incredible program that our historians are doing. It's a 1-year commitment at a time, and there's varying levels that you graduate through each year with a minimum of only 8 hours a month. So you could spend one Saturday a month and be in the program, up to some of our girls come every Friday and Saturday every week. And also just another shout out to Scott, who's starting to really help the girls learn how to interact with artifacts, primary sources, etc. So watching the past couple of retreats that we've have had our participants interacting with the junior history program, which has been really neat to see. And actually 2 of our Seeds of Hope family are in this program. 2 young women are interpreting 2 sisters. They just got their characters yesterday. So it's been really neat to see not only us and the staff interact with all different people from all different backgrounds, but to see, honestly, 12-year-olds learn how to do that. It's really powerful. And I believe it's going to change the game, change their future. So we wanted to do that little shout out. So the last question, and this is incredibly vague, we know, before we get into some practical steps for how your organization might be able to do something similar. So what gives you hope? You can put it in the chat box. You can unmute yourself. I know one thing that has given me hope today is you all, to be honest. It sounds a little cliche, but just watching all of you and the work you do, and you clearly are so passionate for it, it's very inspiring. It's definitely re-energized me in my work.
I would say one thing that would give me hope is what history teaches you is, or what it teaches me is, time isn't linear, but it's cyclical, and things come up again and again. So there's stuff in the past that people have been through that's very similar to what's happening now. Like, for instance, the one thing about the 2020 was there were like several errors that seemed to be repeating themselves at the same time. It's like, people in the past have lived through that and much worse. So there's that's hope stepping into the future.
Absolutely. Yeah. Deanna said something similar, actually. History, seeing resilience reminds me that if we are strong and flexible, we choose or need to be, if we choose. Absolutely. Yeah. Some other things that have been shared in the chat are seeing youth interested in history. James said that. The social justice work of youth gives me great hope. I totally agree with that. We saw that in 2020, 2021, this just vast movement of young people interested in social justice.
If I may, I think what gives me hope, I'm really enjoying this insurgence, no, maybe that's not my word, resurgence, maybe that's not my word either, of interpretive history. You know, I as a student, history was not my favorite subject. I just didn't like how it was taught. I didn't enjoy what I was being taught. You know, it was this whole his story thing. You know, it wasn't my story. It wasn't a story I could relate to. And so now that there's this, I won't try the word again. Now that there's a big push, you know, for an interpretive history, you know, we're re-looking at all of this. And I think as we continue to do that, I think we'll all find that we all have a story to tell. And so I'm excited about that.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Liz Chateau also mentioned, knowing all that Arch is doing now and is on the brink of gives me hope. And she went on, but it also reminds me that things come in their own time. It has been 20 years in the making, not too long, not too short, just right. I agree with you. Listening to that Arch presentation, I did not even know that was going on. I live in Podunk, Northern Frederick County, and it was really inspiring to hear. It was awesome. Wonderful. Well, we're going to give you some practicals, some things that if you're thinking that your site or your museum or your library or whatever it is that you do on a day-to-day basis could do something similar, or reach out to those that are on the margins of society for whatever reason. Here's a couple things we've learned along the way. So sister, I'll let you go through this list.
Okay, first thing, most important is to listen. For nothing else. When I wasn't there when we first went into Bed-Stuy, but the sisters that went in there asked the people, what did they need? What were they looking for? They just lived with the people for a period of time, just living everyday life. And it was the people that told them what they wanted, and that was the direction that we went in. And for me, you got to have great humility. I can never say this is what you need, because I don't know that. These are some things that I think we can offer you. But I need to hear what you have to say. I need to listen to you in many different ways. It might not just be in words. Anyways, the first thing, once I was given the freedom to pursue the Seeds of Hope, I got in touch with somebody at Seton Center, which is does social ministry, and we had one of their case managers facilitate a group. She just pulled names out of her file, invited them to come and just to be part of this group. And we didn't lead it because I wanted to hear, and we've been here in Emmitsburg for such a long time, but amazingly, one of the things they brought up was they didn't all know that they were welcome here. I hate to say that, but they didn't. It's a big campus, big buildings, and some of them didn't even know we existed as a Seton Shrine. We heard how the signage wasn't helpful, or lacking. But anyways, so from that, then we could kind of find ways of contacting groups or working, making it much more open and much more welcoming. Typically, I would be, as I said, my if I was still up in Bed-Stuy, I would know who to invite and everything. But not being in a situation like that, what I did do was when like some of our sisters would be here for something, I talked to them about the program and someone would say, I just saw a comment. I was trying to figure out how I would answer it. Anyways, I would share the vision with them, and then they would have somebody come with them and tell us what we could work around, what their needs would be. And so what we needed to do was find out if we had any people that had trouble hearing, if they could not read, to make sure we had everything accessible, mobility issues. I know you take care of all of these things and speak another language. But the biggest thing to remember is the two things: to listen and be respectful and be humble enough to know that these people have been living amazing lives with so many difficulties. I have so much to learn from them, so much respect. But the other thing is to be patient, because you may send out invitations, or you may think you're going to have less than so many people and all these things. It never works exactly that way. You have to be really flexible. Life happens. And for many of the people that are invited, it happens one moment to the next. Anyways, it does for all of us, but you just need to be able to go with the flow and not get upset, and just realize what a privilege it is to share life with others.
Yeah, so a concrete example of that patience is not only patience with yourself as you're learning the rules of this type of society, this type of socioeconomic group, but also I think almost every retreat we've ever had has started late, considerably late. So that's a practical thing that they, like Sister Anne Marie said, they often are living moment to moment. They're dealing with things. They're trying to make it work moment to moment, literally. So that often means they won't show up right when your scheduled time would be, because they're trying to make things happen to even get here. So it's little things like that that sometimes can be frustrating or feel disrespectful to us. It is not meant that way. So, and the more you kind of open your doors to people that live by a different set of rules, you'll learn, oh, it's totally not their fault. Life happens. So yeah. So some recommended books that Sister and I have found super helpful. One of them is called Toxic Charity, with the subtitle, you can see there, How Churches and Charities Hurt Those They Help and How to Reverse It. This has a lot to do with mentality of what it feels like to help someone and some barriers that can cause. Just a kind of giver and receiver mentality is never really helpful to either person, to be honest. Another one is Bridges Out of Poverty, Strategies for Professionals and Communities. This is actually, there's a 5th edition that just came out. So I highly recommend that new edition. I haven't read it yet, but I've heard good things of the 5th edition. This goes into, it's 8 different sections basically on the different types of poverty. They define 11 different types of poverty in this book, and some hidden rules of society in our country, what people are expected to know, what sometimes people in poverty don't know, and how to help them, how to navigate. There's also a training that goes along with this that can be up to 2 days long, depending on how in depth you want to go. If you're interested in that, you can definitely reach out to Sister or myself, and we can put you in touch with someone that does those trainings in Frederick County. So we can't recommend those enough. So that basically concludes our program. I know we're a few minutes over. But yeah, it's just been so refreshing to hear. And Liz, if you haven't looked at the comments, Liz Chateau has put a ton of information of how this can connect through reframing history and other historical interpretation movements right now. So I totally recommend that. Shameless plug for what she was talking about. So reframing history actually starts tonight, and the toolkit link she put in the chat, that could be really, really helpful. But I don't know, we're really passionate that any place, particularly for history and tourism, can be a place of encouragement, rest, inspiration, and each place will be unique. But the more we help each other out, the better it will be. Yeah. So thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions? Renee, we will totally send you that info. Oh, perfect. Great.
Mary, I'm letting you facilitate questions again on this.
Yeah, I'm watching. Thank you. And actually, you finished 6 minutes early because you
Oh, look at that.
started late.
Oh, wow.
Don't tell Sister Marie, she'll keep talking.
Yeah, exactly. Make the most of the 6 minutes.
Right.
Someone did ask about funding for.
Oh, yes. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, so funding for this. We do some grants, but honestly, we've just been overwhelmed with the support from individuals. We went to the Shrine has a donor base, and we've kind of gone to all of them and said, hey, we want to reach out to people experiencing a variety of different life struggles and bring them here. Can you help us? And people have been incredibly generous. So everything to the retreat participant is entirely free. And that goes to if we charter a bus, if they get 3-course meal, to our museum donations, and all of that is waived. And they get a discount in our shop and all kinds of stuff. It's just totally supported by donors. And we've been so grateful.
Somebody asked, do you find that people may be reluctant to use your program because of the Catholic connection? And because it might be useful for Afghan refugees. Totally.
Yeah. If you know, any, send them our way.
Right. The Catholic connection is not, what do I want to say?
It's not the primary focus. Yeah.
It's not the primary focus. And as I said, like, everybody wouldn't have been Catholic, obviously, in Bed-Stuy where I was, or even around here. It's just a matter of allowing people who could really use a day like this to be able to do that. And like I connected with the rescue mission, most of whom are shelters. And that didn't seem to have a problem. I mean, that didn't seem to present a problem once we talked to different people. And we always say, whatever you need, the day is for you. So choose what's meaningful for you, and mean that more than ever, that I do the artwork or architecture in the Basilica. And the only way I use that is principally what feeds your spirit. Does something like music or art like this, or just kind of like exposure. I don't know if I answered that question. Do I know for sure that it hasn't kept people away? No, I don't. It probably has, but I don't have any kind of control over that. So.
It is something that we just, even on a day-to-day daily programming, Elizabeth Seton happened to be Catholic like George Washington happened to be a Mason, like, but that's not necessarily all we talk about here. Her faith life was important to her, but so were her children, so were her relationships, her friendships, and we try to interpret all of that. Now, we do realize some people, especially going into a church, sometimes that can be a loaded experience for people and their history. And like Sister Emery said, at the beginning of the day, we really try to empower the retreatants that if you want to do something, great. If you don't want to do something, great. So if that means that they don't want to go into the church because that makes them feel uncomfortable, we would never force that on them. The presentation in the church is really focused on art and architecture. So it's kind of like going to St. Peter's in Rome, where you're going to see Michelangelo, you're not necessarily going to pray. So different people will bring their own experiences to different things. Hopefully it's not a barrier, but the Catholic Church can be a barrier, and we realize that, and we try to find common ground, no matter their background or our background. Yeah, hopefully that was helpful. And I was serious, if you know any refugees that you think would benefit, please get my contact info from Scott or Liz or anyone, because we would love to do something. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Anybody else have any more questions? Comments, thoughts?
The initial funding, I want to say, was my sister. I was home sharing my dream with my family. My sisters, we get together up in Maine, and I was just sharing the dream. And for my birthday, she sent me a check and said, this is for your dream. We didn't even have a name for it. Now I had money, I had an account, I had $50 to get started. And so we came up with Seeds of Hope, and every day, things went from there. Anyway.
Great story. Every little penny, as they say.
Right.
Thank you so much, ladies. That was fabulous. It's wonderful to hear about other things that happen in our sites. And I appreciate Scott thinking about bringing you two to us. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. So